Welcome to Recombination Nation. Today, I have managed to get a guest on the podcast who I would say is one of the most consequential influences on the entire direction of my life. John Michael Greer is a prolific fiction and nonfiction writer, a blogger, and a speaker on history, culture, religion, economics, you name it. He's spent some time delving into it. And I brought him on today to talk about the cultural responses to the creeping crises of the 21st century. So that's my kind of quick introduction. John, I'll throw over to you for a bit. Do you want to tell us a bit about like who you are to the audience who may not know your work? And I particularly wanted to ask you, was there a fork in the road in your life between becoming your Archdruid self and maybe a more ordinary life?
Well, okay. Just the very short biographical thing. I was born and raised in the Pacific Northwest in North America, a product of the South Seattle suburbs. I still hate suburbia, and went to university in the early 1980s and left it for 3 years without a degree. Having tried 6 different majors in that time. It's a long story. I've just kind of followed various attempts to understand the world and then say something about it since that time. It's been a long and winding road. As far as a fork in the road, I think to some extent I really never had a chance to have the sort of normal life. I am autistic. And there are a lot of things that many people can handle very, very easily that I can't, and a lot of things that many people understand quite readily that I don't. I'm very poor at picking up on nonverbal communication, for example, which means I'm basically doomed in a corporate environment. So it was very much a matter of spending the first 30 years or so of my life fumbling around desperately trying to find something that I could actually do, and then once I found it, figuring out that I did actually have some kind of talent for writing, getting to the point that I could support myself with it and maybe say something using that set of tools. My life is mostly a function of blundering. For example, the main reason that I ended up with any kind of audience at all is that I happened to contact an old man many years ago, trying to find out some information about an American Druid order, which was nearly dead at that time, and I ended up not that many months later becoming its head. And I decided it was time to start a blog to kind of talk about things of interest to Druids. That became the Arch Druid Report, and that took me from complete obscurity to some minor degree of internet fame, and gave a platform for my books and all this kind of stuff. And it's been a whole series of events like that of equal oddity that have gotten me where I am. So, if there was a normal life in there somewhere, I must have walked on past it, while my attention was distracted.
Now, I'll put a pin in the idea of the potential future influence of neurodivergent people in shaping culture in the future. I think that's going to be an interesting topic. So I've made a note. We'll talk about that in the future. But I wanted to start out reflecting back. I first found you in the early 2000s when I started reading your Archdruid report because it was frequently mentioned on the oil drum. So that was for people who are younger. That was kind of the lightning rod for the peak oil community in the early 2000s.
That was the peak oil blog.
Yes.
Anyone in the peak oil scene was on the oil drum. I was very sad when it went away.
Yes, and you were one of the few non-catastrophic voices that were eloquent enough that you managed to get heard. Whereas people who were screaming about, like, the second total oil production goes down by 1 barrel, everything's going to blow up. They took
We're
a lot
all
of the
die.
they took the spotlight. And I think even though you were in a minority position, you've ultimately proven to be the most correct so far. And I just wonder if you have, looking back on that, any reflections or lessons that we can take out. Like we could be going through another similar cycle of anxiety. It seems to be beginning.
Well, the first thing to do, the first lesson that I have that I had actually learned earlier by the simple expedient of watching financial crises. We had had a couple of them in the United States at that point, a couple of major stock market crashes. And of course, there was a huge amount of, we're all going to die, yelling going on in the background. in both the 1987 stock market crash and then the boom and bust, our internet boom and bust in 1999-2000.
Mm-hmm.
And watching those, I was drawing the logical conclusions. Okay, there are a lot of people who really do seem to want a catastrophe.
Mm.
There are people who place an enormous amount of emotional energy in the idea that society is going to collapse to rubble next Thursday or something like that.
Mm.
And that led me along a long road because, being the geeky person that I am, I immediately said, I wonder what people have written on this subject. That led me to Norman Cohn's book, The Pursuit of the Millennium, which talks about the long history of apocalyptic fantasy in the Western world.
Mm-hmm.
And various other books of the same kind. And I came to see that the whole thing, it's not that people see that a disaster is coming and then proclaim it. It's that people go looking for something on which to anchor these daydreams of absolute destruction or absolute utopia, or both at the same time.
Is it a
And
unique?
so
Oh, sorry.
yeah,
After you,
go
sorry.
ahead.
Oh, I was going to ask, is it a uniquely Western Christian mindset? I'm thinking of like didn't the Aztecs or the Mayans have a tradition of disasters and collapses and prophecies?
Yeah, it's not no prophecy is by no prophecy is a human universal.
Mm.
The idea of that there will be collapses, that there will be disasters, that there will, in particular, there's the belief in a cyclical process that brings disaster at regular intervals is very deeply rooted in human cultures around the world.
Mm.
And so, for example, the Mayan calendar predicts at certain intervals there are going to be literally new suns. The current sun will, the current age of the world will be destroyed, and then a new one will come.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean, by the way, that the folks who were running around like decapitated chickens in 2012 were right. They were misreading the calendar.
Mm.
But there is that belief in a lot of cultures. In traditional China, you have the concept of the mandate of heaven, where a dynasty holds on to the mandate until it falls far enough from the order of heaven, and then it is destroyed, and there's a time of chaos until a new dynasty takes over.
Mm.
This is actually quite it's an accurate reflection of Chinese history. I read who it was that said that the rhythm of Chinese history is set by the tramp of mailed boots going up a stair and the whisper of slippers coming back down. But that's that's the sort of cyclical process.
Mm.
The apocalypse meme, if we can call it that really grabs people in the West, though, is a different kettle of fish because it's the one and done idea. It's not cyclical; it's linear.
Yeah.
And it's originally not Christian. It was originally Zoroastrian.
Mm-hmm.
It went from the Zoroastrians to the Jews, and from the Jews to both Christianity and Islam picked it up from there. And then, of course, with Islam spreading in its great missionary phase, and then Christianity in the era of European global conquest, it became pretty widely distributed around the world. It's very tempting. If you are horribly dissatisfied with the world as it is, and you're angry and you're bitter, and you're kind of feeling that sort of 2-year-old desire to fling yourself on the floor and pound your little fists and drum your little feet until mommy does something, hoping that the universe will listen to you and like destroy everything because you don't like it is extremely tempting emotionally. And we all have a streak of that. I mean, I'm sure we have all had a moment somewhere, and at least in our weakest moments, with the thought of, we're dealing with a modern city, for example, or a modern nation, and the thought of a meteor impact just blasting it to kingdom come has got to occur to most people sooner or later.
Yeah, yeah.
But the problem is that people get obsessed with that, and then they find something to anchor it to, and all of a sudden we hear that, as soon as oil production dropped by 1 barrel, the doom that came to Sarnath will come to us.
Mm-hmm.
And it won't.
We're not getting off that easily.
We're not getting off that easily.
On the topic of prophecy, is science its own form of like mundane, unexciting prophecy, like universal laws that try and predict outcomes and reproducible experiments?
Science is simply is simply a very focused, very limited kind of magic.
Mm.
That's not a criticism. Keep in mind, I have very high respect for magic. The scientists of the scientific revolution, most of them were actually occultists. I think most people know, for example, that Isaac Newton was a heavy-duty alchemist.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see, Johannes Kepler, who worked out the mathematics of planetary orbits, supported himself by casting horoscopes.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but what they did, and this is actually a very sensible thing to do if you happen to be a wizard, they narrowed their focus. They said, okay, what is the magic that we can do if all we work with is what occultists call the material plane?
Mm-hmm.
What if we just work with the powers of the material plane? We try to figure out how they work. We try to figure out how to exploit them, how to predict them, how to anticipate them. It was a very effective spell, if you want to call it that.
Mm.
Unfortunately, like most successful spells, people got obsessed by it and became convinced that was the be-all and end-all of everything. And so we have various problems coming out of that. But science as such, most of the occultists that I know that have any kind of scientific background, and many of them do, it's agreed that the problem with science is not that it's wrong, it's that it's incomplete. It leaves out too much. It tries to explain everything by way of matter and energy. And that doesn't necessarily work too well. But within its own world, is it an effective way of predicting things? Yes. Is it, can we, for example, predict the positions of the planets tens of thousand years in the future? Yeah, much more than that. The solar system starts getting a little unstable. But that much we can do, which is a huge advantage, by the way, to astrologers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. A related question is the lay person's faith in scientism kind of like a cargo cult? Like if the goodies stopped being airdropped, people aren't that deeply committed to the worldview. They just like the booty.
Well, the thing is, keep in mind that the cargo cults kept going for a while after the booty stopped landing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of what's going on right now is precisely that. Really, how much cargo have we gotten of any value recently?
Mm-hmm.
When you look at modern society, most, with the exception of computer technology, most of the technologies that define our lives were in place by the 1920s.
Mm-hmm.
At least in their basic forms. We have automobiles, we have telephones, we have airplanes, we have communication via radio waves. Okay, it's become a little more sophisticated. We have picture tubes now. Those were actually being designed in the 1930s. We actually have added very little to the technology. The scientists have accomplished very little other than solid state electronics, which made computer technology possible, and that was a product of the 1960s. And we've refined a lot of it. Yeah, we've refined a lot of things since then, but brand new, not so much. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say the computing technology we have is very useful as a kind of fig leaf or a glamour over the infrastructure decay that's all around us.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, if you can have everyone looking, staring into screens at these glittery images of Futuropolis, they might not notice that the sidewalk is cracked and all the houses are in bad repair, and that the cars are running out of fuel, and that power is starting to get intermittent. Exactly. And so this is normal. This is normal for a society in decline, because you always have that tendency to produce the image of success, the image of rising onward and onward to greater triumphs. You have, the Mayans in the terminal classic period building the biggest pyramids they'd ever built just before total collapse hit.
Yeah, yeah.
The internet is our Mayan pyramid.
So what about more recent prophecies and possible future ones? Like the most catastrophic climate change predictions, I think, are falling into this cycle of like whoever has the more, whoever has the more terrifying prediction gets the stage, and it becomes a kind of runaway selection. But do you think there'll be other? Yeah. Do you think we need that there'll be other kinds of prophecies that are coming in culture in the next century?
Oh, of course. But once people become addicted to the apocalypse bug, they will find apocalypses. They will come up with, no matter how absurd, no matter how, they'll come up with some reason to keep believing. The religions are actually very, they have kind of an out here, because you can always blame things on supernatural causes. You don't have to prove that anything's going to happen, whether it's the second coming of Christ or the appearance of the Mahdi or, whatever your apocalypse du jour happens to be. You can just keep on postponing it indefinitely in the future. Secular things, you generally have to provide some evidence. That doesn't work too well.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
yes, there
At
will
some
be,
point,
as
people notice.
some people think, and that's happening with the whole climate change thing right now. Is climate change happening? Yes. Is it going to cause major problems and cost the global economy trillions of dollars? Yes. Is it going to bring about an apocalyptic end of the world? No.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is that for the last 20 years, so many people in the climate change scene have flogged this notion that, by 2025, humanity would be reduced to a few hundred breeding pairs huddled around the Arctic Ocean or what have you.
Mm.
And they made fools of themselves.
Mm.
And where they could have said instead, this is a problem.
Mm.
We need to do something about it. We need to take constructive steps both to cut down on CO2 and mitigate. And then, of course, the question is, okay, are you, the protester, actually going to cut down on your own CO2 production? Of course, that's the thing they would never do.
Yeah, that's
And
the
so
rub.
that's the other reason why people are making fun of them these days,
Mm.
because it's all no. I have to keep on taking jet vacations halfway around the world and ecotourism. You have to cut back on your CO2, or we're all gonna die. And it doesn't take long before people start just mocking that, and it deserves to be mocked.
Mm.
It's
Now,
just that the climate is changing, and it's going to hit the global economy rather hard over the next couple of centuries.
mhm. Now, another really common core ingredient in a religion, and I use that word with air quotes around it because I think it's almost like a slur term, the way it's
Mm-hmm.
used today. And it's a very
Which is
broad and
sad.
nebulous term. So yeah, I'm using it
Mm-hmm.
with air quotes. It's the best broad handle I have for what I'm talking about. But the next common ingredient in a religion is mystery. And I'm wondering if
Mm-hmm.
scientism is losing its power on this front. That we have, like 20 or 30 years ago, string theory was like this, amazing, too complex to understand,
Mm-hmm.
fantastic thing. We have inexplicable cosmological data piling up that
Mm-hmm.
we're having the academia is having more and more trouble trying to get their hand around. And I would even refer to a Simpsons joke about another boring NASA rocket launch, like they were rushing to change the channel because they were so sick of watching them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the thing is, that science always was running at a deficit in the mystery scene, because people want mystery, but they want mystery that affects them. They want mystery that relates to their lives some way. They want to feel that their lives are not these closed-in little boxes, that there's an opening into the mysterious, even if they never themselves choose to go through it. They want to
Mm.
know that it's there.
Yeah.
That's the thing that what we can call supernatural religions, if you will. They're very good at that. They can say, no, you have a soul, you have an immortal soul, or what have you. You have this opening onto the mysterious,
Mm.
onto the hidden, onto the transcendent. Science tends to deny that, and then they get into, well, yeah, but way over there's something interesting happening off on the other side of Alpha Centauri, and you can get people excited by that for a little while.
Mm.
And then pretty soon it's a boring rocket launch because they never get any closer.
Mm.
It also does not help when you have scientists, on the one hand, insisting at the top of the lungs that everyone must agree with whatever the current scientific consensus is. Nobody must question it. And then they change their mind at regular intervals. I mean, I remember when all cholesterol was bad for you.
Mm-hmm.
Many of us remember when polyunsaturated fats were good for you. There's all of these constantly changing things. You can only get away with that for so long before people start looking to the latest pronouncements of the bozos in white lab coats and say, "Oh, you're just shilling for your corporate sponsor.
Mm-hmm.
You're just you're just shoveling smoke." And so this is the other problem that they have. And again, religions tend to be better at this because they will establish a set of teachings, a set of doctrines, and kind of stick with them.
Are there
You
some
know,
parallels between growing skepticism in scientism and the Protestant reform, that the kind
oh
of
yes.
self-interested
Mhm.
corruption of the Catholic Church was becoming
Yes.
so odious
Yeah.
that
And
people
yeah.
distanced
And
themselves from
exactly.
it?
And we have our indulgences. Did you ever read about Friar Tetzel?
No, tell me the story.
Okay, Friar Tetzel was the most notorious German indulgence seller. He was a Dominican friar, I think. Don't quote
Mm,
me on that, but I believe he was a Dominican friar. He went all around Germany, raising money for the Roman Church, and doing it in the most egregious ways. But he was selling indulgences against sins, and he'd sell them quite for, even though it's outrageous sins, very relatively cheaply. And he sent a portion of the money back to Rome, and obviously pocketed the rest himself for expenses. And he personally probably played a larger role in bringing about the Protestant Revolution than any other single person, including the Pope,
mm,
because his corruption was so obvious.
mm,
And the extent to which he was using people's fear of sin and fear of damnation as a cash cow was so blatant that people stopped taking it seriously. And so when Martin Luther got up with his hammer and his nails and nailed his theses to the church door in Wittenberg, a lot of people were primed to say, that makes a lot more sense than what we were hearing from Friar Tetzel.
mhm, mhm,
So in the same way, I would say the modern equivalent of Friar Tetzel's indulgences is carbon credits.
mhm, mhm,
And things like it, buying a hybrid or an electric car, which
mm,
actually makes as much pollution. It's just the pollution is at the factory and at the power plant rather than at the out of your own tailpipe. We
mm,
have this whole range of indulgences. We have quite a range of Friar Tetzels trotting around, wishing to sell us indulgences to exempt us from the consequences of our sins against nature. And it really has become blatant enough that many people have just gone, no, somebody please get 95 theses and hammer them to a church door or a university science department door somewhere, will you?
mm, mm. Now, I'm interested in what new mysteries could spark something like a religious reformation of
Mm-hmm.
science. And I want to run these two past you because I really want to get your perspective on them. So the
Mm-hmm.
first one, I've interviewed the scientist who's behind this, is the theory that humans have an origin in an unlikely hybridization between pigs and chimpanzees.
Oh,
And
good heavens! You read about that? Yes,
yes,
yes. I,
yes.
for, I forget the guy's name, but I read his website a while ago,
Mm.
and A, it made perfect sense to me, and B, doesn't it make sense of humanity to think that we are a product of an absurd misbreeding between bonobos and swine?
Mm. And it's ironically, I think it restores some of our lost pride as humans. Like we used to be God's special creatures, and then
And
the mundane
now
story that we
we,
were just strange monkeys kind of
but
knocked us down a big peg. But
now
now
we,
we're something rare. Now we're something
now
unusual.
we're something rare, but I think it's also utterly charming that it makes us something absurd.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's actually really powerful because I think a lot of people feel the absurdity of humanity right now. We we have always felt as human beings, we've always felt just kind of off at a 36.5-degree angle from the rest of the world. We don't really quite fit.
Mm-hmm.
And if we are the product of a miscegenation between a bonobo and a boar, um, that would follow. What was the guy's name? I've temporarily
Dr.
forgotten it.
Eugene McCarthy.
Yes, Eugene McCarthy. Yes,
Mm.
the expert on interspecies crosses in birds.
Yes, yeah, and mammals
And
too.
yes,
It
yeah,
happens all over the place, and I don't know.
oh yeah.
It feels like one of these changes in biology that's kind of creeping
Hmm.
up, and at some point,
Hmm.
someone
Well,
with the
he's
right genetic expertise will do the analysis that
yeah.
like, oh yeah, we can't ignore this anymore.
We can't ignore this anymore. It's brilliant, and it also provides a wonderful response to the problems with standard evolutionary theory. Where do you get the sudden bursts of genetic diversity? You
Hmm.
get them from accidental crossbreeds.
And
It makes perfect sense.
I think it really changes our view of the future as well, because it
Mhm.
means these kind of things could happen again, that humanity could
Exactly.
transform in ways that we can barely begin to guess.
And other species could likewise. Exactly. It,
Mm,
I One of the great downsides of science, and one of the things that I think it borrows mistakenly from religion, is a tendency to determinism, a tendency to say, we can if we actually had all the data, we could predict everything that would happen in the future, and
mm,
it's garbage.
Hmm.
Even at a quantum level, you can't. The universe is fundamentally unpredictable.
Hmm.
But people want a lot of scientists want that sort of Old Testament prophet quality of "Thus saith the universe" or what have you, in place of "Thus saith the Lord." Um, but if in fact random romantic encounters between different species occasionally throw a whole deck of wild cards into the game, and this happens not just now and again, but routinely in the history of life, that makes for a much wilder, much more complex, a future much more open to innovation.
Hmm. Hmm.
So no, I think it's a wonderful idea, and I hope. I don't know that it's likely to play. I mean, how would you work that into a religious foundation? But certainly, it offers, I think, both a way out of some of the dead ends that biological science has gotten into,
Hmm.
and a useful, if slightly embarrassing, view of human origins that makes sense.
I really love watching
Didn't
the
he write a poem? Yeah,
well, I
he wrote
love
a
the
poem called "The Missing Oink" instead of "The Missing Link." It's
yes,
great.
yeah. I love to watching the cognitive dissonance of people told the theory and realizing it's the same feeling that people with a religious, like creationist kind of view of the origin of
Mhm.
humanity, learning Darwin's theory to begin, would have been
Oh
like
yeah,
shocked and horrified, and
exactly, exactly.
their whole world turned upside down.
It's exactly the same thing that happened when Darwin came out and said, here is the simple, straightforward logic by which species change over time.
Yeah, yep. Uh,
Uh,
now,
and by the
well,
way, if I may insert something briefly for the benefit of all of our listeners,
mm.
if anybody out there uses the word evolution and has not yet read Darwin's Origin of Species, suck it up and read a copy, okay? It's not that hard. Darwin could actually write quite well.
Mm.
And if you're going to talk about evolution, please understand what you're talking about. I've had so many people babbling about evolution, both pro and con,
Mm.
who obviously had not the least idea what Darwin was talking about. I think of the woman I talked with at a kind of new agey context in Oregon once, who was saying, "Well, don't you believe that children are just so much more evolved than adults?"
Oh.
um, you know, by which I gather she meant that children were like nicer or something, which is of course not true at all.
Mm.
Children are sharks, but
No, no.
yes. So get out there, all of you, and read a copy of Darwin's Origin of Species. It will not take you long. You will learn an enormous amount. You can get copies of it online. I'm sure Project Gutenberg has it, so you can download it and put it on your e-reader.
Mhm.
Um, but do us all a favor, do that. Okay. Now you
Mm.
were going to say before I started ranting
Oh,
uncontrollably.
no, no. The second theory that's really caught my eye lately that I think could be part of a scientific religious reformation is cosmic natural selection. So this is a theory that was started by physicist Lee Smolin. The idea that when a black hole forms, something like a Big Bang and a new universe is created inside it in its own kind of sub bubble of reality. And a philosopher that I interviewed recently has extended this theory to the idea that there is a probably a role of life in that evolution of universes, that they are developing complexity that increases their capacity to create black holes. And I find it extremely compelling.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's interesting. That's interesting. I had not encountered that, but it is true that if universes need black holes to come into existence, those universes that produce black holes will tend to be selected for because they will produce more universes which produce
Hmm.
more black holes.
Yeah.
So, Darwinian logic on a literally unimaginable scale.
And it puts a kind of teleology or purpose into the very foundation of physics and cosmology that has been stripped out by pure
Well,
scientism.
well, not to be precise, not really teleology, because it's like Darwin. It produces the effect of teleology without actually a teleological dimension.
Ah,
It's
yes.
simply, you know, anytime you have some source of randomness and some source of something that functions as a selecting process, you'll
Yeah.
tend to generate this sort of quasi-teleological movement.
Hmm.
And it was, to my mind, the great genius of Darwin that he pointed out that that's how that works.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Now, the thing, I don't know how well we're going to, how likely it is. Well, now here I may also be blinded by being an American, because right now, what's in terms of the balance between science and religion in the United States, what's happening right now is a major turn toward traditional religion.
Mm,
We are seeing atheists and people in some of the alternative faiths quite visibly converting back to Christianity or back to traditional Judaism, what have you. We're starting to see a very significant amount of that these days. In the writings of Oswald Spengler, who one of the theorists of cyclical history that I've studied most closely, he argues this is a normal stage in the life cycle of a civilization. He calls it the second religiosity,
hmm
the point at which the age, because every civilization has an age of reason.
mm,
The Greek age of reason gave us Greek philosophy. There was a Chinese age of reason, there was an ancient Indian age of reason, and so on and so forth. And they always end up crashing and burning because human reason is not as omnipotent as humans would like to think.
mm.
And so, the whether it's the philosophy or what have you, or the science in our time, ends up making promises that it can't fulfill. And as things start turning sour in a big way, people begin fleeing back to traditional religion as a bulwark against chaos, both internal and external. And we're seeing a lot of that here in the United States right now. I
Uh,
understand they're seeing some of it in Britain. I
mm.
don't know about the rest of the world, though.
Yeah, a tiny bit in Australia. We're always like a decade behind everyone else, so we kind of see it coming. Are there parallels with the revival of Roman paganism during their
Bingo.
decline?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. That was, in fact, one of Spengler's major models. He was looking at that and saying, okay, this attempt by Augustus and his heirs to breathe new life into Roman paganism, and it succeeded for a while. But of course, the thing that nobody likes to think about is that the religion of the second religiosity is a very formal thing. It is a flight from chaos. It is not turning toward the sources of religious experience.
Mm,
I mean, religions are not born because people come up with a set of rules. Religions are born out of the human experience of the divine, out of the fires of religious experience, which is a chaotic thing. It is a
mm,
it is a thing that does not follow our rules. And so you have, when a religion originally catches fire, you have miracles, you have visions, you have martyrs, you have all of this wild stuff. And then it gradually calms down and settles and establishes itself, and then it becomes kind of passe. And then people come up with the age of reason, take all the ideas of religion, file off the serial numbers, and turn them into, scientific theories. So in place of let there be light, we have the Big Bang, for example.
hmm hmm
And then the age of reason falls over and dies of its own excesses, and people flee back to that old religion, but they don't flee back to the fires, the chaotic fires that gave it. They flee to the rules, to the established forms,
hmm
because that's their shelter from the chaos that's building. And it's the people who don't take that route, the people who are drawn to the weird little sects and the odd little cults and this bizarre prophet over in some third-rate province in the Eastern Mediterranean who got nailed to a cross or what have you. They're the ones who are actually laying the groundwork for the future, but it's going to take a few centuries before anyone realizes that.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
So if in fact there is going to be a cult of the swine and the bonobo in the future, and I think it's quite possible. I think it's
yeah.
quite possible. It's going to be a matter of people will remember Dr. McCarthy as as this lone prophet in the wilderness.
Mm, mm.
Say, prepare ye the way of the swine.
I love it. I love it. Well, I mean, that gets me on to the next thing I wanted to talk about was the role of syncretism in
Mhm,
religion and culture more
mhm,
broadly. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about how that might work in the age of the internet. Because we have, on one hand, in theory, we have an
mhm,
infinite number of influences that we can tap into, but in
mhm,
practice, our cultural discourse is being so narrowed and
mhm.
synchronized in ways that feel, I don't know, on a scale that has never been done before. So I don't know.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on
Well,
that front?
what you're looking at is, as with so much else with modern people say, we have this marvelous modern technology, And on the one hand, it opens far more possibilities than ever before. On the other hand, it limits more possibilities than ever before.
Mm.
And the two cancel each other out to an astounding degree. In the same way the printing press at once expanded and narrowed the range of available possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, European folk culture in 1400 was incredibly varied and diverse. And so the rise of cheap print media by way of the printing press, on the one hand, it made it possible for people to get information they otherwise couldn't, but on the other hand, it erased many centuries of folk culture because people weren't interested in it anymore. They wanted to see the latest broadsheets from the city.
Mm.
And so it's very much like a lot of the yelling around peak oil and generally the predicament of our time. On the one hand, you have people saying, our technological world has brought all of these sources of total destruction that never existed before, and therefore we're going to fall faster than ever before. And on the other hand, you have people saying, no, we have all these sources of power that can rescue us, and therefore we don't fall at all. And in fact, the two are both right, and they cancel each other out, which is why we've been declining at the usual speed, in the usual way. Our leaders are making mistakes that were old in the days of Babylon. And they're playing out at the usual pace.
One thing I'm really interested in is the potential for digital technologies to let people form small, like walled garden communities. And I think the degrading experience of the open algorithmic internet is getting to the point of driving people away from those platforms that previously dominated.
Oh, yes. Generally speaking, one of the great trends underway right now is retro technology.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know whether you mentioned that Australia's about 10 years behind everywhere else right now, but I don't know if vinyl records have picked up where you are.
Yes. Yeah. They've already gone through their peak. Yeah.
Well, actually, here they went through a first peak, dipped a little bit, and have continued to climb.
Mm-hmm.
Vinyl is establishing itself as a permanent market these days. It's very common especially for the newer, more interesting musical groups, to release on vinyl. I happen to pay attention to this because I have a stereo. I have a lot of old. I mostly listen to old vinyl records because that's my taste. I'm 63. My tastes are what they are.
Mm-hmm.
But it's become, we've gone from vinyl is over to vinyl is this little niche technology that only a few weirdos do to vinyl is back in a fairly big way. And it's because, just as the record heads said back in the day, the sound quality really is better than digital. And so I think we're seeing this. The ebook peaked and declined, and it's established itself as a niche market. But print books are still dominate the book market these days. And we're seeing more and more technologies these days. Here in East Providence, Rhode Island, a pleasant little working class East Coast town. When you see the kids hot dogging these days, by kids I mean teenage boys, they're on bikes usually, on bicycles, not in cars.
Yeah,
because cars are so expensive now. So they have notched back down. They've basically done a bit of retro tech, and they're focusing on a technology they can afford to still get the experiences they want. I see this as the wave of the future. I expect the internet to become more homogenized, especially as some of the political downsides are becoming increasingly apparent of the sort of internet fragmentation we're seeing. I expect to see internet becoming much more tightly controlled by national authorities. And so there will be a movement away from the internet on the part of little subcultures and communities, because they won't really have the option that we have had for the last few decades of somebody like me putting up a website and just making my essays available, and well, there they are, have fun. I suspect there's going to be a lot less of that as we proceed. Also, of course, the internet costs a lot of money.
Yes.
And it's becoming increasingly clear that the advertising model is not working. So that being the case, rationing by price is the next thing that's going to happen. I would not be a bit surprised if within a few years, for example, it starts costing you a little bit to send each email. Maybe a fraction of a penny to start with, but they won't stay there.
Do you think
and
something
so on and
like,
so on.
well, do you think something like the Cuban internet, where it's basically USB drives with,
Mhm.
all the data people actually want being handed person to person, that something like that could
Oh yeah,
spring up in parallel?
oh yes, very, very, very much so. I think that's actually it's a good example because in Iran before the revolution, um, because of course everything was very heavily censored under the Shah's regime.
Mm.
The standard way to get things around was cassette tapes.
Hmm.
People would record things on cassette tapes and just pass them from hand to hand, and they actually coordinated the entire revolution that way. So yeah,
Mm.
the sort of sneakernet USB internet, that's a real possibility.
Yeah.
I would not be at all surprised if we see a return to packet radio.
Hmm.
Amateur radio can do packet bulletin boards quite effectively, and it can be done either on a local or on a more long distance basis, and it's relatively inexpensive. It does require some technical skill, but that we have a lot of geeks in the world, and that's something that's fringe enough, and it would it requires enough interest to get involved in that I would expect the authorities will probably let it happen as a kind of safety valve,
Mm.
while the main internet becomes increasingly bland and formulaic, and very much like, say, radio and TV stations are.
Yeah, yeah. I can totally see that. Another thing I'm really fascinated with is uh, the prohibition on graven images in various religious traditions.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if people might start applying a similar restriction to their engagement with digital. So, for example, creating a culture where music is more sacred, and you just refuse to listen to any music on the internet to kind of
Mm-hmm.
reclaim that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There are actually some very small fringe groups that more or less do that. I think
Mm.
of anthroposophy, the occult system created by Rudolf Steiner back
Hmm.
in the early part of the last century. It's part of Steinerian belief that recorded music isn't really music.
Mm.
It doesn't have the spiritual dimension that music should have, and so music must always be played live.
Interesting.
So that the framework is there, and I
Mm.
could see because in an era of decline such as we are now moving into, religious groups that come up with good reasons to not do the things that everyone's going to have to do without generally tend to thrive. One of the reasons Christianity really blossomed in the fall of the Roman Empire is that if you have a tradition that's saying, okay, poverty is good, it's going to, if everyone's getting steadily more poor, that's going to have a certain appeal.
Yeah,
In
yeah.
the same way as the internet becomes increasingly costly, increasingly unreliable, increasingly controlled, if a religious group, be it one of the part of one of the established religions, say a Christian denomination, or whether it be some little group that will eventually evolve into a large religion, start saying, the digital stuff is evil. Digital stuff is soulless. Digital stuff, the digital world is in the hands of the devil or what have you.
Mm.
They actually might do very well because if people are looking at their own access to digital media being cut off, they say, well, why not?
Mm.
Maybe I should go down to the Who's at church down the road.
I could also imagine like an anti-digital music group protesting businesses the same way vegans will like,
Mm-hmm,
do a
mm-hmm,
protest around a
mm-hmm.
butcher.
Yeah. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, and that makes particular sense because one of the things that happened with the rise of digital formats, and especially the rise of online digital formats, is that it became almost impossible for small musical groups to make a living
Hmm. Hmm.
because their music is by definition stolen by everybody.
Mm.
And so the amount of blatant copyright theft these days, it's very good if you have to be a corporate provider because it allows you to squeeze out potential rivals.
Mm.
But it's very bad for creative artists of all kinds.
Mm. Mm.
And so, so yes, I could definitely I actually think one of the reasons that a lot of people are putting stuff on vinyl, putting their music on vinyl these days, is that it's a lot harder to pirate a vinyl disc.
Yeah, yeah. And the object itself has significance. It's not,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
the object itself has significance. The object itself is it is a thing to have,
Mm.
and you're not going to lose access to it because your provider decides, oh, we've decided to drop that band.
Mm. Now, the next topic I'm really keen to talk about is the
Hmm.
role of biology in past religions and the potential
Hmm.
for it to become integral in whatever future religions emerge.
Hmm. Well, go ahead. Go ahead and let me give me a clear idea what you have in mind here, because that's a very broad topic.
Oh, well, I mean, I'm trying to think. Like ancient Egypt had
Hmm.
all sorts of symbolic use of animals and plants
Hmm.
were like
Hmm.
deeply woven into worldviews
Hmm.
and rituals.
Hmm.
Even the heads of the gods were like usually some kind of animal or other.
Oh yeah, yeah. Hmm.
And
Yes, the
whereas,
horse with the hawk head and so on. Yeah,
yeah,
and
whereas I
then
think
and we.
if you go through to like Islam and Protestant Christianity, it seems to be almost absent.
Hmm. Hmm. And to some extent, there is an anthropocentrism that's set in yeah with in what astrologers call the Piscean age. You know, the age that began roughly around the time of the birth of Christ. There's this tendency toward increasing anthropocentrism, increasing anthropolatry. You have Roman emperors setting themselves up as gods, something that would have seemed completely absurd to most people not that many centuries beforehand.
Mhm.
Um, the idea that and that this ultimately reaches its peak, I think, in modern scientism with this insistence of man, the conqueror of nature, man, what's bestriding the stars, and the kind of rot you hear from the from the more extreme worshippers of the altar of scientism these days.
Mhm.
Um, it's this anthropology, this attempt to put humanity, in place of the divine. Now, I certainly hope that that's going to move in a different direction, and a movement towards some broader sense of the divine would, I think, be very productive. But I I mean I sit here and think, okay, imagine that the two of us are Roman intellectuals sitting in the forum, off hour, things are fairly quiet, or in a tavern off the forum, tipping back some wine. And we're talking about the religions of the future. What do we think, religion's going to evolve into in the future?
You would never see
syncretism.
Christianity coming. You'd never see it coming.
Nobody would ever imagine that it would be based on the cult. The insistence that a guy who was punished, who was crucified for rebellion, would be identified as the equivalent of one of these dying and resurrecting fertility gods of the Eastern Mediterranean, and become the center of a monotheist cult.
Mm.
Nobody would have guessed that. And so I really think, I feel that we're kind of in that situation right now. This is, it's like the bonobo and swine thing.
Mm.
Okay, there are if genuine randomness, if genuine novelty, which is another way of saying the same thing, exists within history, there's no way of knowing.
Mm.
And in fact, if you take religion seriously, if you assume that religion as a phenomenon is about the manifestation of the divine in human consciousness, then it's not up to us. It's up to the divine.
Mm.
And how that will manifest is not something human beings can predict or anticipate, unless unless a god or goddess happens to nudge a prophet on the shoulder and say, "Here's what's going to happen. Take note. Brace yourself."
Well, I have a parallel example
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
the domestication of corn. So
Hmm.
teosinte was they did this is a recent genetic analysis that I was
Hmm.
astonished by. So teosinte was the result of a hybridization of two wild species, and it produced
Hmm.
something that was still a tiny little rock hard seed. And for thousands of years, it was grown in just a few mountain valleys in Mexico. It wasn't a big deal. But then a
Hmm.
third hybridization happened, and that's where the
Hmm.
transformation into the monster that
Hmm.
we know today, which is
Hmm.
almost unrecognizable. And I don't
Good
think,
heavens. Okay, yeah. So all of a sudden, zot. Some farmer in a mountain valley in Mexico goes out to see the grain fields and is going, what,
yeah.
what has happened here? What are these titanic, you know, these titanic grain things? Obviously the gods are very happy with me.
Mhm.
or
And
something.
that's what I think is interesting about this hybridization-driven
Hmm.
biological change. It functions
Hmm.
like a miracle. Like you can't
Hmm.
predict when it's going to happen, but when it
Exactly.
does, it's a self-propagating miracle. It doesn't just
Yeah.
vanish and just remain
Hmm.
as a story. It's something you can actually
Uh-huh.
see that you've never seen
Yeah.
before.
Exactly. If and the thing is, if I remember the thesis from the website, um, very likely there are many such crosses, most of which turn out to be non-viable, but every so often one turns out to be really viable.
Mm, mm,
And so, and you just never know.
mm.
You just never know.
It reminds me of the mantra of reductionist science, which says doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity. And it's
Hmm.
like maybe like a pure chemical solution or a mass
Hmm.
being dropped and timed works like that, but most of the rest of the
Hmm.
universe doesn't play by those rules.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point because, yeah, in fact, even in chemistry, if you're dealing with something that isn't completely simple, um, if you do the same reaction 100 times, it's going to be in more of a normal curve than
Hmm.
the same result each time.
Yeah.
And every so often, you're going to get a fat tail one way or the other.
Hmm.
And so yeah. In fact, one of the embarrassing things that I learned from people I know in the education industry these days is that these days in a lot of science classes they don't have people do experiments; they have people do computer simulations of
Oh,
experiments
yes. Yeah.
because the simulations will come out the right way and the experiments don't always.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely.
Hmm.
Oh, I had one other thought.
Hmm.
Part of the appeal of Christianity when it emerged was that it was so transgressive and confrontational against the
Hmm.
established power structure. And I wonder if
Hmm.
the worship of invasive species could have a similar appeal.
I like it. Yes. Well, and yes, and the thing is, it was um, aggressive and transgressive, but it was aggressive and transgressive in um, a totally unexpected way.
Mm,
The idea of being transgressive, being confrontational in Roman times, dominated by the energies of the waning age of Aries, was you get in there, you kick butt. It was violent. Heracles was Soter, the savior, this heroic figure who would go in. The thought of being that it was confrontational and transgressive to let yourself get fed to a lion,
hmm
to eagerly embrace martyrdom, that was transgressive in a way that nobody knew how to deal with. And yeah, actually, I think, the whole invasive species thing is a crock of compost at the best of times. What's happened is that people have embraced a completely false notion of nature as a static phenomenon,
mm,
and they're frantically trying to keep keep Gaia from engaging in her usual balancing activities. Here's Gaia trying to get new, strong, vigorous generalist species into places where they can thrive and balance out the changes that are happening with climate and ecosystem and so on. And
mm,
here's humans going, no, 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 we have to keep it exactly the way it is because nature must not change. We won't allow it.
hmm
And you get these completely absurd things. There's this failing crusade going on right now on our Great Lakes against an inoffensive little mollusk called the zebra mussel. Well, not actually that inoffensive, but the zebra mussel, it's native to the Caspian Sea. It's called a zebra mussel because it has black and white stripes on its shell, and it's a filter feeder. It got into Lake Erie. Now, I don't know if you have any idea what, when I say the word Lake Erie to anybody in America, we know about Lake Erie. Rivers flowing into Lake Erie when I was a kid used to catch fire every summer. They were that chemically polluted.
mm,
Lake Erie was biologically dead. It's a huge lake. It's an immense lake. It was biologically dead because all of the crap that had gone into it. And then the zebra mussels got into it. And the zebra mussels are, ooh, this is full of all kinds of nutrients. And yeah, half of them are toxic, but who cares? We're good with that. And they proceeded to clean up the lake.
mm,
And actually, zebra mussels are starting to become rare because they like water that's more polluted than Lake Erie is nowadays. And they've had the fish, the largemouth bass and the pike and all the various kinds of fish come back to the lake
mm,
for the first time. And there are still people engaged in a crusade against the zebra mussel. You'd think they'd put up a gold statue to the thing.
mm,
Um, because Gaia managed to get around our stupidity and get the right organism to the right place to save the lake.
We have a
So
similar
yeah,
cult of hating cane toads in Australia.
oh yeah,
And in my
So
very, very,
tell me about cane toads.
well,
I mean I know they exist. I know that they're poisonous. I don't know
they,
anything more about them.
they were a very simplistic failed attempt at biological control. They were brought in to control cane beetles, which they weren't interested in,
Hmm.
and they just spread everywhere else. And they are poisonous, and they did cause a lot of chaos as they spread. But they've been around for what, about 50 years now. And
Hmm.
on my weedy, overgrown farm, I have all of the native frogs I can deal with and cane toads. And
Hmm.
I regularly see things eating the cane toads. They're just part of the system now. And it took a little while to
Hmm.
settle out. But yeah, pretty much nothing has changed other than now we have another species in the mix. But
Hmm.
yeah, people love unloading their cruelty onto their species because it's publicly sanctioned. It's a virtuous thing to attack this animal.
Hmm.
Whereas anything else, oh no, you're not allowed to hurt any other creature. But it's open season
But
on
cane toads
yep,
you can slaughter on the spot. Okay, yes.
yes, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah. That probably that's the thing that nobody's thinking. Again, this is why. Again, listeners, read The Origin of Species. If you take a species and subject it to serious pressure like that, a serious effort to exterminate it, unless you're really good at exterminating it, you're going to improve the species no end.
Hmm.
So Australia has probably succeeded in breeding the super cane toad. The cane toad to rule all cane toads rises up going, ribbit.
Well, the very early
Unquote.
ones got enormous, but now they're much smaller. It's very rare to see a
Of course.
huge one anymore.
Exactly. What happened, of course, is the big ones were easy targets. So they learned to be small. They evolved to be smaller. They evolved to be quiet.
Mm.
They evolved to just blend right in. Yeah. Hmm.
And the funny thing is, they love mowed lawns, roads, and artificial lighting. Like those three things that
Hmm.
humans spread everywhere. That's why you see
Uh
cane toads, because that's their habitat.
huh. Okay. What you're telling me is that Gaia has a nasty sense of humor. Which again, I tend to assume that anyway.
Mm.
Yeah, we're actually having a fine time here because Burmese pythons made it
Mm.
into Florida by way of some escaped pets,
Hmm.
and the Burmese pythons get in Florida. Florida is very nearly tropical, and it will be fully tropical in the near future, of course.
Mm.
And they're getting up to 10, 12, 15 feet long. They'll take out small alligators,
Hmm.
which is our native crocodile, of course. And they people are freaking out about them, but it's a tropical jungle. It should have large snakes. Okay, it's
Mm.
really the North American ecosystem since the end of the Ice Age, is, to use an ecological term, is depauperate. It has a major shortage of species,
Hmm.
and so some more species are trickling in the current manner. I don't know at what point we're going to get cave lions and things like that back again. All in good time, I'm sure. I've seen some cats that were working on it, but
We
well,
we have
it's
we
like
have a population of panthers that have escaped and started breeding in Australia, and
oh sweet.
we've been without predators for about 20, 30,000 years, and
Hmm.
without large herbivores for the same amount of time. So yeah,
Well, no,
it's been
when did
we lost
when did the thylacines
our thylacines
the
were
thy-
lost from the mainland 5,000 years ago when the dingoes came in.
okay, yeah.
Um, but they're
Hmm.
kind of, even dogs are kind of more coordinated scavengers. True
Okay,
predators
gotcha.
we
Yeah,
haven't had in
true.
tens of thousands of years.
Well, that's too bad. Obviously, I'm glad the panthers are doing their job.
Mm, mm. Well, I
Yeah,
mean,
well, here in the eastern part of North America, they exterminated the timber wolf. Okay,
mm,
so the coyote is filling in, which is the kind of, you probably have not encountered the coyote. It's a kind of a pocket wolf, and as they have moved east and gotten into our regrown forests where there were farms before they went bankrupt of a century ago, um, they're getting bigger. They're getting shaggier. They still
mhm.
don't have the long, low howl, which I object to. It's more yip, 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 yip kind of sound. But they're on their way to wolfhood.
Yeah.
maybe
I,
those people who've reconstructed, genetically reconstructed dire wolves will let
mhm.
some of those get out and get into the coyote mix so we can get some proper howl.
I believe there's been recent hybrid speciation in the coyotes in the US as well. They've been
Oh yeah,
crossing with other canids, and that's the way
those
it goes.
coyotes. Coyotes are, yeah, they are kind of the canid definition of polymorphous perversity. They will eat anything, and they will mate with anything.
Hmm.
So, promiscuous hybridization, it would not surprise me too much if we ended up with wild panthers as they ended up mating with coyotes, and the results of that would be strange.
Now, one of the favorite posts from you of all time is you imagining the future evolution on Earth millions of
Hmm.
years ahead. It was
Hmm.
such an
Well,
eye-opener for
the,
me.
the next 10 billion years. That was a fun.
Yes,
That was a
that's the
fun
one.
project. Yeah.
So, do you have any intuitions about the near future changes in Earth's ecosystems in response directly to the carbon dioxide levels jumping up so much? Like, ignore
Oh.
all the
Oh yeah.
temperature debates and sea level rise, just the CO2, which you can measure and is like right there. Are we entering
Hmm.
a new primordialism when grasslands give way to fern meadows again?
Well, it depends very much on where you are. First of all, the reason that we didn't have grasslands in the Carboniferous is that grass hadn't evolved yet. Grass is very recent.
Mm,
Grass is, I think, like Miocene.
yeah.
It's a very recent creation and one of the Earth's real success stories. And so, what I think is more likely is that if we are to get a warmer, wetter climate of the kind that would provide that, is that we would see less scrub grass and more bamboo,
Hmm.
which is of course a variety of grass, or things like that. But the thing is, you really can't talk just about CO2 without looking at moisture levels, without looking
Hmm.
at temperature. In North America, at least, I won't speak to the rest of the world, but in North America, the great determinant of growth is rainfall.
Mm.
So what produces our Great Plains is not the temperature. It's not any of the other factors. Certainly not CO2 level. It's the fact that they don't get enough rain
Mm.
to support a forest, and there's a ragged line running down more or less the middle of the country between the eastern part, which is wet enough to support forest, and the Great Plains, which support tall grass in the east and short grass in the west, and then you have the high desert and the strip of wet climate along the coast,
Hmm.
which looks more like Tasmania than anything else, anything else in North America.
Hmm.
And so, if we get a warmer, wetter climate, you're going to see the forest move closer to the Rockies. Current predictions are that as the climate warms, actually things will get drier.
Hmm.
And if that happens, of course, that's going to have some interesting effects because right now, large sections of the dryland west are barely habitable. They're
Hmm.
just, they've been surviving on fossil water from the ice ages pumped up from the ground. And if that goes away, if it reaches the point that there simply isn't enough water, then you're going to have places like Phoenix, Arizona, and Las Vegas, Nevada, that have to be abandoned. Lost cities of the desert, and large sections of the Great Plains during the hypothermal, the warm period right after the last ice age, were deserts. The Nebraska sandhills were sand dunes like those in the Sahara.
Mm.
So, and it really does depend on where you are. It really does depend on where you. If you look at what the climate was like 6,000 years ago, you'll actually get a fairly good idea of what the climate's likely to be 1,000 years from now.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's going to be rather interesting because 6,000 years ago, for example, the Sahara was grassland. It was savanna.
Hmm.
It had lions and gazelles and giraffes living in it. And so was the empty quarter of Saudi Arabia,
Mm.
the most desolate desert on earth right now, with the possible exception of the Taklamakan, had regular monsoons. And so think of what that's going to do to the balance of world politics if the Sahel states in Africa are suddenly verdant grassland with they're capable of raising crops in the valleys, large beef herds or what have you. I don't happen to know what Australia was like 6,000 years ago. You're more likely to know that than I am. But that's what I would look toward. What was Australia like in the hypsothermal? What was going on there? Was it wetter?
Mm.
Was it greener? Were there more interesting animals trotting around on it? Well, those are on their way.
Mm. They're already out there doing very well. I wonder if there might be parts of the world where a niche for pastoralist nomad cultures
Oh yes.
is going to open up
Oh yes.
as the current
Oh yes.
system of like putting barbed wire fences for like 50 kilometers stops being
Mm-hmm.
viable.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The only reason we don't have a significant amount of pastoralist nomads, I mean, there are still some in North Africa, in parts of Central Asia, but the reason it's purely the fact that we can afford to subsidize other forms of agriculture through vast amounts of fossil fuel energy. As that ability goes away, for example, the U.S. Great Plains are a wonderful place for pastoralists.
Yeah.
The only reason we didn't have that wasn't the case in in pre-Columbian times, that they didn't have the livestock.
Yeah. Yeah.
But now horses and cattle and a great many other llamas do very well here in North America. They've become a very popular crop among farmers.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's all kinds of things that could be herded by nomads on horseback. So in fact, 500 1,000 years from now, one of the great military challenges in North America, it will be defending the cities of the Mississippi Valley against raids from the pastoral nomads from points further west.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I totally see it. Something similar happening in Australia too. We've got so
Oh yeah,
much
yeah,
land that's not good for much else
yeah,
than
exactly. And now
nomad.
you have horses, now you have cattle, now you have various other kinds of livestock that would make pastoralism work very well.
We've got better camels than the Saudis.
I did not know that. I had heard about that. We almost did that here. I'm very sad to say there was an attempt to bring camels into the American West,
Mm.
and by the U.S. Army, and some of them got away, and they apparently maintained a breeding population for a little while. But as far as anyone knows, they finally died out, which is really
Mm.
sad. It
Hmm.
would be great if we ended up with camels.
Mm.
But you have better camels than the Saudis. Are they? Is there a large wild population at this point?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Very large wild population, and we regularly like catch them and export them to the Middle East because their genetics is so strong.
I'm delighted to hear that.
Yeah, we just need elephants, and then we're pretty much set.
Yeah, no, that how well did the savannah? Yeah, I'm still hoping for mammoths here in North America.
Hmm.
It just the landscape just doesn't seem right without huge woolly mammoths trudging across it. So I've high hopes that there's like 3 projects around the world where they're trying to sequence mammoth DNA and essentially get a hybrid mammoth, using an elephant for the mom.
Well, I have an alternative idea that I'm pushing out into the world that we
Hmm.
have a limited window left to fully domesticate elephants, and we could probably do
Hmm.
it by hybridizing African and Asian elephants, which are cross-fertile.
Hmm.
And that's
Hmm.
probably the
Hmm.
only hope for that branch of the mammal family to survive in the long run, because their
Hmm.
trend
Hmm.
has been nothing but down for the last 100,000 years, well, maybe millions of
Hmm.
years if you
Yeah.
look back. Homo
Yeah.
erectus
Yeah.
probably drove a few to extinction too.
Oh yeah. Yeah. There used to be what 50 or 60 species, counting the mastodons, the
Yeah,
mammoths, and the
yeah.
regular elephants, and they're all fairly closely related.
Mm.
And yeah, I mean that would be cool. Or yeah, I mean yes, the elephants are useful. Elephants would be welcome. But yeah, I have an emotional fondness for mammoths from looking at pictures of
Mm.
prehistoric life when I was
Mm.
6 years old.
Yeah. Now, another thing that I want to ask you about. So, I'm
Mhm.
really fascinated with the trilobites. They were the first
Mhm.
armored animals that had
Well,
jaws
they're lovely. The
and they
trilobites are lovely creatures. Yes.
yeah, and they were they had a first mover advantage for a while, and they just went on a massacre. Like they ate everything that got in their way with a soft body. But
Hmm.
eventually, other organisms pulled the same trick, like crustaceans, and replaced them. They had like a
Hmm.
second mover advantage. And I wonder, could humans be the trilobites of sentience?
Hmm. Well, you're assuming that we're the world's first sentient species, and I'm not sure that's true.
Yes.
One of the things that I have occasion to note is that there are, let's see, about 3 places in the fossil record. One in the middle Jurassic, one in the middle Cretaceous, and one in the very early Eocene, where there are these sudden CO2 spikes in the atmosphere. And geologists now say, well, it had to have been volcanism or something like that. But I look at that and say, are we so sure of that?
Yeah.
Maybe these are what remains, because, after 50, 90, 180 million years, you don't have a lot of likelihood of any other remains. Are these CO2 spikes all that remains of another previous sentient technological species that rose and fell, that cycled through? 10 million years is a long time for a species. Our records go back 5,000 years. Imagine, 10 million years of human history. Imagine 10 million years of saurian history. There were a lot of small dinosaurs that were upright and had claws out in front where they could manipulate things. So, but on the assumption, if in fact we are the very first, there are certainly other species that could be moving into position to compete with us. Most of them don't have hands just at the moment. One of the advantages that we have over dogs, for example, because dogs are picking up intelligence very quickly. So are cats. Many of the animals that live with people seem to be picking up enormous amounts of intelligence. And so I look at this and I go, but they don't have hands. And so there was a charming novel written a few years ago, Lives of the Monster Dogs, about dogs that had been modified surgically to function more or less like human beings, but they had to have these complicated prostheses built into their front paws to manipulate things, and that that doesn't work genetically. But so I could very definitely see a future, say 1 million years from now, where dogs, for example, are fully intelligent. Fully sentient, they have their own, they have civil rights and everything, but there are things they can do and things that humans can do, and but there's a definite difference there, because we've got hands and they don't.
Yeah, a lot of people don't appreciate the human brain massively expanded the cerebellum so that we can actually use our hands. It's not just not just frontal lobe.
No, it's this fantastic complexity of motion. Watch a pianist sometime playing a piece of Mozart or something, okay? And you realize the incredible delicacy of physical control that we have. Dogs can't do that. They can do a lot of things. Their capacity to work with smell and sound is incredible. And I'm sure they will evolve other ways of getting by and making a good living, but we've got the hands, we've got the capacity to this fine manipulation of matter, which they won't have, barring strange hybridizations, and let's not get into that. But at any rate, leaving that to one side. But yeah, I could very easily see a situation where humans become simply one of several intelligent species. And the question is, at what point does something evolve intelligence that can match us with hands? I look at things like the raccoon. That's one of our American critters you may not know much about. It's a distant relative of the carnivore. And I think about equidistant from the carnivores, and I'm not sure what else. But at any rate, they manipulate things with their front paws all the time. They're very good at it. They get into garbage cans. They're very good at that. Their paws are very delicate. They have they have that selection pressure going on to get hands that work. So in the next 10 billion years, I postulated them as the most likely source of the next intelligent species on Earth.
We just need someone in China to train them to make iPhones.
Don't laugh. I'm sure that if anyone's listening to this program in China, they might go, "Oh, we could do that." Because they have some relatives. They have some raccoon relatives over there, so I think it's not impossible.
Now, part of evolutionary history I'm really fascinated with is when insects and flowering plants collided and
Hmm.
completely changed the evolutionary dynamic for both parties.
Oh
And
yeah.
I wonder
Uh-huh.
if humans have a similar potential to become a universal genetically influencing symbiont with every species on the planet. That even without like high laboratories and,
Hmm.
supercomputers analyzing genomes and CRISPR, that just our ability to interact flexibly with pretty much any
Hmm.
organism out there, that we have
Well, I
this
don't.
strange capacity
Yeah.
to change the evolution of pretty much everything around us.
Well, in theory, yes. In practice, we don't actually change the evolution that much.
Hmm.
There's a lot of critters in the world that are going, oh, humans, big deal. But certainly, we have already had a major impact on the evolution of a large number of species, and I think as long as we exist, we will probably continue to do so.
Mm.
No
Mm.
doubt, if there were intelligent saurians back in the Toarcian period, in the Toarcian era, epoch, in the Jurassic, they had the same impact on the insects and the small saurians and large saurians
Yeah.
and what have you. Um, but it's something that intelligent species very likely do. Domestication
Mm.
is a very powerful effect. So is the development of commensal relationships
Mm.
and even parasitism.
Mm.
There are a lot of critters that get by because making do in and around human homes, in and around human activities. Yeah.
Well, a couple of related questions. We, in the modern age, often refer to our elites as parasites or predators. Do they
Hmm.
actually serve a overall beneficial function in human ecosystems in that role? That it's not actually an insult if you know a bit about ecology?
Hmm. Well, there's a case can be made. A case can be made that they have such a function, and in fact, the sort of elite replacement cycle that happens quite regularly when one elite is displaced by another, arguably happens when they stop fulfilling their function adequately,
Mm.
and then another elite is more or less selected to replace them. We're having that's going on in the United States right now. We're seeing a bureaucratic elite being displaced by an entrepreneurial elite because the bureaucratic elite is no longer serving its ecological function.
Mm.
It's frankly too costly for what it um, for the services it provides.
Now, another interesting question I want to ask you is,
Mm-hmm.
can you apply the idea of natural selection or artificial selection to human cultures? And if so, was there a
Oh.
transition from natural to artificial selection? I would think of like modern consumerist culture is very much
Mm-hmm.
engineered and artificial, but
Mm-hmm.
how far back
Mm-hmm.
does that go?
But the thing is, once you start getting into culture, how can you draw a line?
Hmm.
Because every culture is the product of human action,
Mm.
and everyone who contributes to those actions does so at least partly in an intentional fashion. So you've got intentionality going into it, no matter what. There is
Yeah.
artifice going on. I mean, I'm sure that when the evolution of the witch doctor
Mm.
was while it had there was an extent to which it was a natural process, it was also helped along rather substantially by witch doctors looking at their paying attention to the market and saying, okay, what do I need to do to make sure that people are happy with me and will continue providing me with like food and things in response to my performing witch doctor services for them.
Mm.
At that point, you very quickly have artificial selection, both witch doctors acting on their community and communities acting on their witch doctors.
Yeah, yeah. And it's
And
kind of
so
like
it's
it's a sliding scale of centralization, I guess.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And so as the most successful witch doctor eventually becomes the high priest,
Mm.
eventually becomes the pope.
And then other people below imitate their success, and it kind of
Exactly, exactly.
coalesces. Yeah.
And yeah, and then you have just as the most successful the guy who's really good at leading a hunting band gradually becomes a chieftain,
Mm.
gradually becomes a petty king. Eventually, you have an emperor or a president.
Mm.
Um, yeah,
Uh,
and so it is very much it's a combination. It's impossible to draw a line though between the natural and the artificial because artifice is natural to us.
yeah, 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 yeah. Artificial is just a shorthand for human
Hmm. Yeah.
because of how we've been. led to
because
see ourselves as separate.
we are the artifice is the artifacts. He who has art, he who does art.
Mm.
Including craft and skill and everything like that. That's what we are.
Mm.
Homo artifacts. And so everything we do is natural and artificial at the same time.
Now, you have done a lot of thinking about post-industrial society, and
Mm-hmm.
could you kind of tell us what you think the biggest differences between the pre-industrial world and the post-industrial world will be? Like if you could flick back and
Oh,
forth between 1500
okay.
and 2500, what would stand out
Mm-hmm.
as different? Because some people just think, oh, we're going to go
Well,
back to medieval times, and it's like, oh, that's probably history never really goes
it's
backwards like that.
true in part and not true in part. There are certain patterns that tend to recur in every collapsed civilization. Some kind of feudalism is almost
Mm,
inevitable
hmm
because feudalism is sort of the default organizing program. People don't understand feudalism. Feudalism is government based on personal loyalty.
mm,
You have a baron. The basic feudal act is the vassal kneels before the baron. They join hands, and each of them makes a promise to each other.
mm,
That's feudalism. And so a society that is governed entirely by that kind of personal bounds, with individuals as the anchor points for it, whether it's the king, the baron, the swineherd.
mm,
In a fully developed feudal system, the swineherd's relation to his swine is understood in the same term as a king's relation to his barons. Each one has duties corresponding to the others. Again, if the abominable swine theory is true, there might be more to. Well, never mind.
mm.
But the fact is, if you take say European feudalism and then compare it to Japanese feudalism, or compare it to late Byzantine feudalism, or compare it to feudalisms elsewhere in space and time, you'll find it's very closely comparable.
hmm
There are huge parallels because that's when every other system of organization collapses. That kind of rallying around individuals and establishing bonds on the basis of personal loyalty, that's the fallback. So I do expect there to be some kind of feudal system.
Is the
There
internet
will also.
training people to understand feudal dynamics? I've seen like a Facebook group is basically a feudal fiefdom that there's one person
Oh
who
yeah.
founds it, they have absolute control, and they can
Hmm.
exile
Well, my
people at a
yeah.
whim.
No, my blog is a feudal domain.
Mm,
you know, it's not quite bound by formal oaths of fealty.
mm,
But the thing is, it's not a matter of people training to do it. It's a matter that that's the way things naturally work out when other social connections break down.
mm, mm,
That's sort of our default level. So, but the major difference, I would say, first of all, is that there will be elements of technology carried over, just
mm,
as there were. I mean, steel, decent steel, was a fairly late Roman creation.
mm,
And it was picked up, of course, all across the world, all across the Western world, because a steel sword will chop an iron sword in half.
mm.
And so, there were various other things that were relatively advanced Roman technologies that were picked up and preserved in various places and became common. So similarly, firearms,
Mhm,
radio, simple
mhm.
shortwave radio, I expect to be preserved. Very probably ultralight aircraft. These days, it's
Ah,
actually not that to make ultra, and the military advantage of being able to pop someone up to 1,000 feet, and he goes around and looks, is just unspeakably huge.
mm,
They used to have to send out cavalry patrols to try to find the other side. Now you've got 10 ultralights up there at 5,000 feet, each one of them with a radio.
yep,
We
yep,
know
yep.
where the other side is. So, so there will be a range of things like that will be preserved. And
I,
very likely
I,
also.
I'm
Yeah, go
guessing the
ahead.
dynamic might be a little bit like the way knights were a relatively small number of people, but
Oh
they were
yeah.
so highly
Oh yeah.
armed and trained that they could just
Uh-huh.
run over
Oh yeah.
any peasants that opposed them. The,
Hmm.
the, the, the power imbalance was so huge that you only needed a relatively small number
Hmm.
of knights to control a
Hmm.
territory.
You see, one of the great changes, though, is precisely the coming of firearms,
Mm,
because basically the sort of high feudalism of knighthood or of the samurai or what have you, armor is the key. And armor, if you have a suit of armor, you're practically invulnerable. If the peasants get upset at you, big deal.
Mm-hmm.
You can take on 20 of them and slaughter them all.
Mm-hmm.
But if one of those peasants has a musket, you're dead.
Yeah.
It does not matter. Your armor will not save you. And so this is why, for example, in late feudal Japan, they found out about firearms. They got fairly good at them and then banned them for several centuries because they realized it was so completely fatal to the feudal system. And why, as once firearms became widespread in the West, the feudal system became an anachronism. So we will have a more diffuse mode of feudalism, and one in which, it will be much more a matter of, I imagine the feudal war bands consisting of infantry shouldering rifles with, a few planes, a few ultralights in the air, a little bit of radio, maybe a few cannons. And more importantly, perhaps, I expect to see a lot of what's being done now with organic agriculture, with biointensive agriculture, with permaculture, hopefully, becoming fairly widespread and being adapted locally to produce much more stable food crops. That's going to be a huge advantage to the future.
Do you think biological technology could adapt and persist in forms that previously weren't possible?
I don't know. I don't know enough about the requirements of maintaining a biological technology. It depends also just on what specifically we're talking about. I think it's possible that things could be created, and if they turned out to be biologically stable over the long term, they could be preserved. There were quite a few cities in the post-Roman world that still had working aqueducts. They couldn't build them. They had no idea how to build them, but they could keep them working. And if at the same time, if you have cultures that produced some kind of useful compound, or you created some kind of animal that did something interesting, or if you simply put a lot of work into making dogs intelligent. If your army has a regiment of trained dogs, they're going to be tough. They're going to be tough to beat. And so, you want to keep watch around the camp at night. Well, Lieutenant Fido, you're on.
I think there's interesting possibilities there. The other thing I wondered, I know you talked about iron and steel being preserved in some uses, but is it possible that we could be going through the end of the Iron Age? And I ask this because historically iron was produced where you had good quality surface ores, a forest or coal and water power all very close to each other and close to a population center to do the work. And have those resources been so thoroughly depleted by the industrial age that, going back to like peasants having iron tools might not be feasible at scale at some point in the future?
At some point in the future, but right now we actually have these amazingly rich mines of not merely copper, but a large range of metals in incredibly high concentration. They're called the ruins of cities.
Yeah. Well, I even wonder if a couple of centuries of recycling that stock could mean we lose the ability to take raw ore, because it's a complicated process. And if you have like 200 years of salvage, that's much easier. When that runs out, you're like, where did this come from?
Now, one of the other things to keep in mind, many metals this isn't an option, but bog iron it's constantly being concentrated by chemosynthetic organisms in swamps all over the world. And the quality of the iron is not that good. There will be a long learning curve. But as the availability of salvage begins cycling down, bog iron, first for basic uses where quality is needed, nails, for example, is going to become a useful alternative. I don't really see iron running out anytime too soon, especially because of the bog iron things. Other metals, copper is going to be a thing of the past. For example, copper is we don't have the advantage of bog iron, of bog copper, and many other specialty metals will be very hard to find. But certainly we won't be throwing around iron and steel in the kind of quantities we're used to, because you can actually make fairly good steel using charcoal. The Japanese swords are made from a charcoal-based steel.
Mm-hmm.
where they take the ore and they use pine charcoal specifically to get it carbonized and get it to to refine it and smelt it.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't do it in quantity.
Yeah, that's where I
And
think the
so,
big change is going to come. Like the idea of
yeah,
building roofs and fences and bridges
yeah,
out of iron is not going to be
exactly. No,
sustainable.
that's not going to be sustainable. But knives and plows and mattocks and guns, yes,
Mm, mm.
they'll be more.
Okay.
They'll be a good deal more expensive.
Mm-hmm.
But then that was true again before the Industrial Revolution. Steel was a bit of a luxury product,
Yeah, yeah.
and I don't here in the colonies that became the United States, it was normal for trunnels, wooden pegs, to be used in place of nails
Mm-hmm.
until well after we won independence, precisely because metal was pricey, wood was
Mm-hmm.
cheap.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, now
So yeah, go
in
ahead.
in the next 100 years, which historic
Mm-hmm.
social technology do you think is more likely to prove useful? The monastery, the guild, or the university?
The universities that currently exist is doomed.
Mm,
Um, it has become very expensive. Now, ours, I should say, that's especially true here in the United States, where the university system has basically turned into a sales gimmick to push predatory loans on the vulnerable,
mm,
without giving them any adequate recompense.
mm-hmm.
So we're facing. I have good friends in various universities, and they're saying the thing that's being passed around, the scuttlebutt there, is that they're expecting something like half the universities of the United States to have to shut down in the next 20 years.
Yeah, yeah.
And the rest, I don't know how long they'll last, simply because they don't provide any useful service these days. The basic concept of the university probably will be lost, and then will have to be recovered.
Mm-hmm.
The guild depends on how decentralized things get.
Yeah, they're very
Because
vulnerable to
guild,
international trade and competition and
oh,
undercutting.
they're completely vulnerable even to national trade.
Yeah.
Guilds thrive when your local city is an economic unit.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, are we going to slide far enough that cities are no longer viable? Because if that happens, there will be no guilds.
Mm.
If there remain cities, but there isn't a lot of trade between cities, or it's purely a matter of luxury trade by sea, by seaborne trade, that could, the guilds will probably flourish. Monasteries always thrive during difficult times,
Mm.
and they should. They are one of our species' great inventions for preserving culture through dark ages. And so the main thing that's keeping them from really getting going right now is that most of the people who like to dream of being in a monastery don't want to deal with poverty, chastity, and obedience.
Yeah, yeah.
And you cannot do a monastery unless you're willing to give up sex. It's been tried many times. It always fails. Once you get sexual jealousies in there, it's going to blow all the pieces. Whereas if you have celibacy, you have celibates, you have and you're willing to embrace poverty, you can do extremely well.
Mm.
So basically, what's going to have to happen is that people outside of the current comfortable middle classes are going to have to start dreaming of monasteries.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean
And
that links
we're
that.
a little ways away from that.
Yeah, yeah. But the steady immiseration of the younger generations, I think, is building up the pressure, the incentive to
Oh,
run away
yes.
and lock yourself away from the troubles of the world.
Oh, yeah. And what here in the United States, where the gender issues have become such a toxic mess, there are a significant number of young men at this point who I think are potential monastery fodder.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
if somebody were to organize a genuine conservative, Benedictine monastery on the old style and open its doors to young men, my guess is they'd be full up in an hour.
Oh, how do you
Because
think? Well, how do you think neurodivergent people, coming into their awareness and connecting with each other, could intersect with, not just monasteries, but cultural responses to the pressures of the today and the future?
Well, I'll start with the monasteries because that's one of the classic things for a neurodivergent person to be was a monk back in the day. I mean, it's a perfect if you happen to have, as I do, Asperger's syndrome, what they used to call Asperger's syndrome, it's very nearly the perfect lifestyle. Your social interactions are laid out strictly by a rule. You don't have to wing it. You don't have to read subtle interpersonal relationships. What does the rule say? This is what
Hmm.
you do. Oh, good. You can spend all day obsessing about copying, the life of Saint Swithold to the letter. And at the end of the day, the abbot will look down and say, well, my brother John, that's very nice. You can be valued for your contributions.
Mm.
And so, yeah, it's a logical place for geeks to end up.
Mm.
And so, more generally, it's a heck of a question.
Mm.
What exactly the recognition of neurodivergence is going to do? The great question that I have, and I do not know a solution, I don't know the answer to this yet, but the great question that I have is, to what extent is this going to be a genetic factor? Is what extent are we actually seeing the subspeciation within humanity?
Mm. Mm.
Because if neurodivergence is genetically transmitted, we could be spinning off a population of humans, possibly a self-sustaining, replicating population of humans who are psychologically, mentally different in ways that are rooted in biology. And that could, and obviously, we have our drawbacks, but we also have our powers.
Mm. The power
we,
of of a filtered founding population like that has been
mm-hmm.
demonstrated over and over again in human history.
Oh
When
yeah.
and
Well, one of
previously
the
it's
main
kind of
reasons
happened accidentally, but in the internet
now,
age,
yeah,
it could happen more
one of the
deliberately.
one of the reasons Donald Trump is president of the United States right now is that by way of the chance, by way of the whole web network of websites and of that attract many young neurodivergent men
Mm.
who are very proud of describing themselves as basement dwelling dweebs.
Hmm.
Okay, and they played a very significant role in putting him in the White House.
Mm.
And so, there are people going around now with T-shirts that show Pepe the Frog and "Autism is my superpower" on it.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
So it's a real thing. How that's going to, but the question is it genetic in nature, or is it on its way to developing into a genetic pattern? Is there going to evolve a breed or a caste or a self-sustaining group of
And they
people
have the
with these
challenge of
odd.
maintaining demographic success through what is probably going to be a shrinking global population.
a,
That's
a,
another
a,
big
a population,
challenge.
yeah, a population already poised to shrink and
Yeah.
shrinking everywhere but Africa. It's fertility is below replacement level,
Mm.
and Africa is dropping like a rock.
Yeah.
So yeah, what's going to happen? I don't know.
Mm.
It depends on whether us autists can meet those challenges, can provide services to the rest of our communities that are sufficiently valued,
Mm.
can meet the demographic challenges, can get laid.
Yeah,
And,
there'd probably need to be a completely new social contract around producing children, I think. But there
exactly.
might be an
Yeah,
opportunity for that in the future.
I think it's very possible. I think it's as more as the neurodivergent community develops more of a sense of self understanding, more of a sense of identity, and as it becomes more and more clear that there are as many women who are neurodivergent as men, it's just that
Mm.
in many ways it's not quite as obvious.
Yeah, yeah.
My
Uh,
late wife, for example, was high functioning autist,
mm.
and that was one of the main reasons we stayed happily married for 40 years until her death,
Mm.
was that we were both geeky as all get out. And there was a particular joy in two geeks geeking out together about a common geek subject that the neurotypical will never know.
I really wonder
I
if
laugh,
there's
but I mean that.
Well, I
I
really
laugh, but
wonder
I
if
mean that quite seriously.
yeah, yeah. Well, I really wonder if there is parallels with behaviorally modern humans, like storming across the planet. What did the Neanderthals, these relatively culturally conservative people, think
Mm-hmm.
when like these body painted, weirdos came over the hill and
Mm-hmm.
they're just like, what the hell are these?
Yeah, yeah. I suppose, I don't want to fall into the science fiction. Did you ever read A.E. Van Vogt's novel Slan, or any of the Slan stories that fed into it?
No?
It was there was this whole shtick. That was the most famous of various things. The idea was that there was this new mutation among humans, this new human
Ah.
species coming to being. And
Mm.
in fact, science fiction fandom, you used to be able to see buttons that said "Fans are slans," and but the stereotype that there might be some kind of serious mutation taking place in the human mental structure. It has been done to death in science fiction circles.
Mm.
But it's just possible that that's what we're talking about.
Mm.
That we're seeing a mutation in human brain structure that will lead eventually, with a certain amount of certain of natural selection to weed out the versions that don't propagate well, to create a decidedly different human population.
Mm. Mm. Oh, I have another really big question I want to ask you. How do you think
Mm-hmm.
culture will respond to what I think we both agree is probably the inevitable end of the internet at some point? It's the biggest, most complicated, expensive, fragile machine that we've ever built, and its economic
Mm-hmm.
model has never been particularly great. At some point, it's going
Yeah.
to degrade and then disappear. And how do you
Mm-hmm.
think, like, are there opportunities in that moment?
Oh, well, it's first of all, it won't be a moment.
Mm,
We're looking at a situation where the internet will gradually price itself out of existence
hmm
because people are going to have to pay for the server farms. They're going to have to pay for, which mostly they haven't been paying for.
mm,
So it's going to be It's going to be rationed by price. It will gradually shrink down. My guess is to a situation rather similar to to ARPANET as it was, where
mm,
it connects the government with big corporations and the handful of surviving universities. And gradually, more and more people will be shut out of it, and they will find other ways to make those connections.
mm.
If you These days, while we have the internet, you can go and pick up PDFs of some of the old science fiction pulps from back in the 1920s and 1930s. Pick up a copy of Weird Tales sometime, and look at the letters to the editor column. It's an internet forum.
Hmm.
It's a monthly internet forum with people posting various things. That's the differences are minor. The major difference is that it only reaches your mailbox once a month.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so my working guess here is that what's going to happen is that we will see, as people are priced out of the internet, as people simply leave the internet because it becomes increasingly dysfunctional, increasingly restricted, increasingly boring and bland, is that people are already beginning to pick up zine technology again. And photocopied zines are starting to show up. They're starting to become quite common. And so that we'll see a gradual movement toward print media as the replacement for the internet,
I
as
think
the internet replaced
I
print
think a
media.
lot of people would agree that it feels like we've already passed peak internet, that the
Oh yes.
experience a decade ago was
Mhm.
far more functional and enjoyable than
Yeah.
where it's heading now.
Yeah, I put peak internet around 2010 actually,
Mm,
just on the
mm,
basis of my experience.
mm.
And yeah, we're well into the point where, for example, search engines do not find things for you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We're into the point where email is mostly a matter of wading through the scams and the spam,
Mm,
um, and so as that process picks up, yeah, people are going to turn to other things. My guess is just as we've seen the resurgence of the print book, we've seen the resurgence of the vinyl record, we'll see the resurgence of the print magazine.
mm, mm,
And that during the couple of hundred years between now and the actual twilight of industrial civilization, the actual the point at which things really fall apart, there we'll see another era of magazines. As of course we had about 200 years of that on the way up.
Do you think beyond that, the industrial production of cheap paper might open opportunity for a new writing technology that doesn't rely on paper?
Well, it would depend on how much energy and resources it requires, now, wouldn't it?
Mm, mm.
And I don't know. Again, it's very much like bonobos and swine. You never know when someone's going to figure something out.
Yeah, yeah.
And
I,
if somebody comes up with a functional, reliable writing surface, like cheap paper.
mm,
I mean, that was one of the really revolutionary developments, as important as the creation of the printing press. And in fact, in some ways, it made the printing press possible. It didn't make
yes.
the printing press was completely useless if all you could use was parchment.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
once rag paper came into general use, and then and pulp, of course, once pulp paper, but of course that probably won't last.
Mm,
But I can certainly see a return to rag paper, a return to hemp paper.
hmm
And the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Declaration of Independence, is written on hemp paper,
mm,
um, and things like that. I could very easily see those coming back to common use.
mm. I'm
But
also,
could there be something else? Of course there could. It depends on whether some geek in their basement is fiddling with things and going, "Wow, you could write on this," and then away we go.
well, I have some plans on that front, but it's still embryonic.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Now,
Well, we need more basement geeks. We need more
yes,
people trying new things, saying, yeah, who cares? It's weird. Nobody wants it. I'm going to have fun with it anyway.
yeah,
That's why we have airplanes.
exactly,
Because two guys
exactly.
who worked in a bicycle shop decided, yeah, I want to build an airplane in my spare time.
Mm. Now, I'm also really interested to get your impressions on using the internet to create cultures and communities, particularly those that are intended to ultimately survive the end of the internet or to like transcend and like escape the internet. And maybe the Green Wizards Forum would be a case study. I'm not sure how actively involved you were in
It
that community while it was running.
there have been several attempts to. There's actually been many attempts to do this.
Mm,
The Green Wizards Forum. I wasn't really actively involved in it.
hmm
I spun it off, and I think it's pretty much run down at this point.
hmm
But there have been many attempts to do this. The problem is that the success in the internet selects for certain things, and success in the outside world requires a very different set of things, and the two don't seem to overlap much.
Yeah, yeah.
So we'll see. I'm perfectly willing to be proved wrong, but my guess is that what's going to happen is that it won't be the internet. It will probably be people who are turning away from the internet, who will create new social forms
Yeah,
that
yeah,
will survive the internet.
yeah. I think you might be onto something there. Now, I also wanted to talk a bit about literature because
Mm-hmm.
you're a writer. Like that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
your biggest sword in
That's what
your arsenal.
that's what I do.
But
That's what I do. Yeah.
you've also recently become active on Twitter as well. And I
No,
just
no, 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 no,
no,
no.
that's
I
not
am not
you.
on Twitter.
Oh, that's not
No,
you.
that's not me. Somebody, I don't even know who it is, but somebody started picking up squibs from my writing and posting it on Twitter. And I don't know who it is.
Oh,
It's actually I don't object to it because they haven't like faked anything. They are just taking things they think Twitter will find interesting, put out there. No, I have no social media. My sole social media presence, my blog, my Drawing with Journal, and then now and again I show up on a couple of communities in Reddit, which I
mhm.
got into because it allows me to monitor certain of basically fan communities that I interact with, primarily in the occult field.
Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, I was curious to get a general idea of how the landscape has changed for writers and what do you think is coming next? And if you have any thoughts about Substack, because it's an odd
Mm-hmm.
thing that started to gain momentum.
Oh, Substack is the wave of the near future.
Mm,
Um, because the difficulty we have, certainly here and in many other countries as well, is that the corporate media outlets are very, very rigid in what they will permit to be
mm,
posted.
mm.
They have their agenda, and don't you try to buck it. And so increasingly, people have fled to Substack as the convenient place um, to get out from under that. Some very serious writers and journalists have made, and you can appear on, you can set up a Substack account, you can start making money, and since you're not supporting the whole superstructure of the corporate presses, you can make quite a decent living there.
Mm,
This is actually one of the real waves of the future right now, is disintermediation.
hmm
Okay, up until now, it's been the sort of centralization of communications have focused on mediation. So you have all of these layers of structure between you and your audience. If I were to write for a big corporate press, for example, I would have to go through all of, I'd have to get an agent, and the agent would have to sell the book to the the acquisitions editor. There would be the whole corporate hierarchy getting in the way. It would finally be printed, sent out to big bookstores, blah, 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 Amazon, all this kind of stuff. All of them would take a cut. And I'd be left with a pittance. I mean, your average the average author of one of these big publishing is getting less than $1 per copy of a book that costs $25.
Yeah, it's pretty dire.
Small to mid-sized presses are kind of the intermediate stage. That's where I've made my entire writing career. Small to mid, I've had a few things with big presses, mostly on their request, but normally I go with small to mid-sized presses where I can contact the person who runs the company. We can have a nice little conversation. I can send them the manuscript. I get a response usually within 24 hours as to whether they're going to take the thing or not. And it's much more congenial, and there's much fewer hoops to jump through, and they don't tend to have a hard and fast agenda that you have to kowtow to. So that's very useful. But I also I haven't really gotten into self-publishing because that requires business skills that I don't really have. But I know people who make a very good living at it. I do issue astrological forecasts by way of Patreon and Subscribestar, which are two of these online subscription things, and that actually makes a very large chunk of my income these days, because it's all the money goes directly to me with a very small amount going to the venue, and that also is disintermediating. And of course the blog and things like that. So one of the things we're seeing is a growing number of writers, of artists, and musicians who are doing an end run around the corporate system entirely and finding ways using the internet to connect directly to their audiences. That's one of the reasons I expect the internet to be shut down, because it's turning into a massive liability for the corporate system.
It reminds me a little bit of the proliferation of newsletters leading up to the French Revolution, where anyone could print out their theories and throw them all over town.
Exactly. The printing press generally had a very similar function, which is why there were frantic attempts to regulate it in most of Europe, and why freedom of the press was such a big issue here in the United States. Because printing presses, even a simple printing press was not that pricey, and so it spread the capacity to get your message out into an enormous number of hands. So we'll see what happens, but it's very much in flux. Right now, most of the publishers, the big publishers, the name publishers, the one who gets the one who fill the New York Times book reviews and things like that, are all owned by, I think, 6 huge corporate combines. And none of them make any money.
Yeah.
They're literally running the things into the ground because they're so ideological and they're so fixated on things that have nothing to do with what people want to read. And so it would not surprise me if we were to see within the next decade, most or all of those either go bankrupt or sell off presses right and left, and see a great wave of decentralization. And that's very promising. It's usually when publishing is in the hands of many independent companies that you tend to get really lively literacy. And science fiction is my great example. Science fiction in the middle years of the 20th century was an enormously successful field, precisely because there were dozens of modestly sized paperback presses, and if you could write your way out of a paperback, you could probably get a sale somewhere. And so there was an enormous amount of crap produced, but there was also an enormous amount of really interesting, innovative stuff. Nowadays, it's all in the hands of that tiny number of huge corporate combines who bought up all the formerly independent science fiction presses. And science fiction has become stunningly dull. It all rehashes a tiny handful of storylines. It's all fixated on, we're going to space future. Science fiction used to have lots of futures, many of which had nothing to do with, penetrating the cosmos with giant metal phalluses. But we have this obsession with the spacefaring future. We have this obsession with various political agendas and so on and so forth, and it's just gotten dreary.
Well,
so, as someone who loves science fiction, I would love to see the combines broken up. I'd love to see lots of little presses out there printing all kinds of different competing visions, and maybe we'll get some decent science fiction again.
Well, we've also got the paradox of self-publishing which in theory, like the internet, is extremely diverse, but in practice, everyone has to put their book on Amazon and put up with,
Uh-huh.
whatever the terms and conditions are that week. And
Hmm. Hmm.
I've been thinking about the history of poetry, that it went from a very high elite art, and then I think in the late 1800s it became popularized, and so many people were having a hand at writing poetry that the whole
Hmm.
field became oversaturated and cringe.
Hmm.
And even to this date, like most people, when you mention a poem, they kind of wince. And I wonder if the
Well,
novel could go in the same direction due to
oh,
an
well,
oversupply and an under curation. Like nobody wants to
mhm.
curate. There's no business model for curation anymore.
Yeah, yeah. No, it depends. I think this is one of those situations where um, there are niche markets where the novel can do fairly well.
Mm,
There are still people doing certain kinds of genre novels in particular, and often with little presses
mm,
that are doing just fine. But certainly the mainstream literary novel is already moribund.
mm,
So somebody writes a novel and it gets lauded in the New York in the various book reviews and things like that, and it sells 1,500 copies or it sells 6,000 copies because the actual audience for yet another self-absorbed, dreary rehash is just not that large.
mm,
And so, yeah, I think the it's partly the failure of curation. The problem with poetry, of course, is that it was partly a matter of inadequate curation, but it was also a flight toward, and you see this all across the fine arts, a flight toward credentialism in place of talent.
mm,
A move, as we saw with visual arts, we moved away from visual arts where you can tell if the person actually knows what they're doing,
mm,
toward let's splash some paint randomly on a canvas and call it really meaningful,
mm,
because that way your MFA is all that matters.
mm,
Talent need not apply. We have that in poetry. The beat poets were really the culmination of a process, about half a century in length, which basically reduced poetry to gibberish.
mm,
William Butler Yeats could support himself writing poetry in the late 19th, early 20th century,
mm,
and because he was writing poetry that anyone could read and enjoy. Um, Most of the stuff that passes for poetry nowadays, nobody reads it, nobody enjoys it. The same is true of classical music. The same, of course, is a fortiori true of all the visual arts. They've become invested with a sterile academicism, a focus on credentialism, and an avoidance of anything that would display either talent or, as it usually turns out, the lack of same.
mm. Did poetry have to transform into songwriting to kind of
Oh yeah.
repurpose that skill set? And it kind of peaked
Oh.
through the mid 20th century, and now it's kind of again centralized, commercialized. The distribution systems are
Uh-huh.
all jangled up, and
Exactly, and
nobody
and
who
that's
genuinely
all.
does
And
the art makes money anymore.
exactly. Although at this point, here in the U.S., certainly we have a resurgent poetic scene in the form of rap. I'm not a
Yes.
great fan of rap, but
Mm.
it is basically we're watching the immediate ancestors of the tribal bards of the coming Dark Age warming up.
Yep.
Many of them
Yep.
are very good,
Mm.
and they're getting that sense of rhythm of word, how to communicate, and doubtless it will go through several more cycles of being dumbed down for corporate consumption. But the urge to say something in a rhythmic fashion, to give words the power that only poetry can give them,
Mm.
it seems to be hardwired into humanity. It's something that every culture does. It's
Mm.
something that dates back as far as we can tell. So very likely it's part of something that we've evolved, that has co-evolved with us.
I learned something
And
interesting the other day that one of the
mhm,
things that triggers oxytocin release is hearing
mhm.
someone tell you a story.
Oh yeah.
Mm.
The thing is, storytelling is the oldest human information technology.
Mm.
And originally, telling a story in rhyme. I bet if you take a moment right now to remember some of the nursery rhymes and little songs that you learned as a very small child,
Mm.
you can remember them letter for letter. And you'll probably have to fight. Now, for example, there's the alphabet thing: A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Nobody can repeat that without having to fight constantly against falling into that particular sing-song pattern.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the oldest human information technology. It's a technology that we used a million years ago to pass on crucial tribal lore. It survives nowadays in mythology, in some of the very oldest strata of poetry. And it's powerful stuff. It's hardwired into us because people who could remember things that way succeeded. Tribes that could remember things that way succeeded where their rivals failed.
I almost wonder if the novel is evolving via the audiobook back into like
And it's
fables.
possible.
Mm,
It's possible. I know a lot of people who do. I don't do audiobooks. I love paper books,
mm,
but I know a lot of people who are into audiobooks. And yeah, getting the whole world of orality, the world of oral transmission, it's a very powerful thing.
mm, mm,
And we'll see what happens. But very likely, um, I'm hoping that the printing press is one of the technologies that survives into the next dark age.
mm,
That happened. The last set of dark ages in East Asia, they had woodblock printing presses, and it massively improved the capacity of society to preserve large amounts of information.
mm, mm,
A lot of literary works, a lot of religious and philosophical works, and mathematical works, and so on, survived in China and Japan and Korea precisely because they made woodblock. They made woodblocks to print from,
mm.
and proceeded to print from them.
I have a provocative question for you too. Has
Mm-hmm.
science fiction been a net positive for humanity? And if it was a net positive at some point, is it kind of past its pull date that it's kind of
Well,
we need
how
something
how could one
different?
how could one possibly tell? You'd have to get you have to line up a series of Earths and have one with at least one with science fiction and one without. Um,
Uh,
Certainly, science science fiction. I mean, the reason there are boot prints on the moon right now is because geeky 12-year-olds in 1920 were frantically, feverishly turning the pages of copies of amazing stories
hmm
and dreaming about spaceships. It never made any economic sense. It never made any practical sense, but it fed that dream, and many of those kids grew up to become engineers,
hmm
and some of them grew up to become politicians. So yeah, there's a lot of power in science fiction. Has had a lot of power. The current form of science fiction has passed its peak in the 1970s,
mm
and you can see this kind of fossilization that sets in. But science fiction has cycled through this before.
hmm
There have been these waves of innovation followed by waves of mummification, and we're in a very mummified period right now. The snide comment you'll hear online is that science fiction is all about what is it? Fully automated luxury gay space communism.
hmm
It has this very rigid worldview of what the future must be, this particular Tomorrowland, and it's fixated on that because that's kind of the act of faith, and the fact that that's never going to happen. We are not going to the stars. We're not even going to the other planets, and there are
mm
very good reasons why that's the case. But they don't want to let go of it. I had a very funny experience here. One of my first really successful science fiction novels, Stars Reach, is basically what happens when it finally sinks and we're not going to the stars.
Yeah.
That's kind of the theme of the whole thing. Although there's a lot more that goes on there. It's set in about 2495, and the main character makes his living extracting metal from the ruins of cities. His job title is Ruin Man. He belongs to a guild, by the way.
hmm
Um, and um, and when it came out, some of my fans and readers sent copies to science fiction writers that they knew. I got screeching diatribes about how wrong I was, bloody, bloody, blah. It was hilarious. Science fiction is supposed to be about what if, but don't you dare ask what if we're not going to the stars. Seems to have been the message. But,
do,
they're going
do
to
you
have to get over it because we're not going to the stars. And I think there are millions upon millions of interesting, colorful, lively, positive, upbeat, optimistic futures that have nothing to do with giant metal phalluses penetrating the womb of space.
mm,
I'd like to see more science fiction about that. I
yeah.
would love to see science fiction about that, but people are busy stroking their rockets.
Do you think the probable spectacular implosion of Musk's empire at some point in the future
Hmm.
could mark that cultural turning point where
I hope
we wipe
so.
away those old mummified fantasies of going to space, and it
I
forces the
think
culture to look for something different.
what's going to happen rather, because it's something like that, something negative like that isn't the typical trigger. What will have to happen is that somebody will write a novel.
Hmm.
The reason fantasy we even have a genre called fantasy fiction right now is that an uber geek Oxford professor named J.R.R. Tolkien decided to write a long novel.
Mm.
There had been a lot of, what we now classify as fantasy fiction before that time, but it didn't have an identity. It was just some people wrote some novels that took place in imaginary, vaguely medieval places. Some of them are really good. But then, Tolkien wrote a novel.
Mm.
And it came out, and really didn't do much. It was a fringe thing for about 10 years, and then the 60s happened, and an entire generation glommed onto it. And all of a sudden, they redefined a significant fraction of the world's imagination.
Hmm.
I think that's what needs to happen here. Somebody needs to write a novel that catches on in the same way, that redefines the future in an interesting, lively, compelling future that has nothing to do with spaceships.
Hmm.
And that's the thing that will make everyone go, oh God, spaceship stuff is so dull, which it is.
Mm.
It was interesting in the 1950s. Even though most of the 1950s science fiction was rehashing ideas from the 1930s, there were still interesting things you could do about space travel in the 1950s. 1950s were a long time ago.
Mm.
Every interplanetary story has been done to, every space travel story has been done to death by now. Let's see something different. Let's see something interesting. Let's see something a little less improbable, please.
Hmm. Hmm. Now, I have a fun final question that I ask all of my like crop and livestock
Mm-hmm.
breeding guests, but I want to see your take on it too. If you could wave a magic wand and create a new kind of life form, what would you wish into existence?
Oh, that's so tempting. There's so many things that I would like. Um, that's a difficult one because on the one hand, the obvious thing is the winged cat. Cats with wings are a thing in American Fortean phenomena. People keep encountering them. They're biologically impossible, of course, but people
Mm.
keep seeing them, and,
Hmm.
and it's a charming thing, and I would love to have them. It would be an extreme annoyance for birds. I understand that, but you still have to put up with it. As I also mentioned, I have a deep fondness for mammoths.
Hmm.
And I would love to see mammoths trudging across the American landscape again. But the problem is, one of the major fictional works that I've done, a series of books, actually 11 books in all, where I basically took H.P. Lovecraft and turned him inside out, stood him on his head, and told the story from the side of the tentacled horrors and the supposedly evil cultists.
Hmm.
One of the things that really built on was the idea that in the sort of Lovecraftian world, there are 7 different intelligent species on Earth. Most of them are hiding from us right now for very good reason.
Hmm.
And the world just seems so much more interesting. When I put myself into that headspace, there I am with one of my characters finding out that not only are Shoggoths real, but they're not just monsters. They have their own culture. They're interesting. They have their history. They're very fond of cheese. And and they're people. Okay, they're very different kinds of people. They don't understand numbers at all since they don't have and there's a lot of things that differentiate them from us. I think it would be some other intelligent species
Mm.
that's as smart as we are, but that understands the world in a very different way.
Hmm.
I think
Hmm.
the thing that I would most like, maybe Shoggoths. Shoggoths are useful because they're very difficult to kill, and they don't usually devour people unless there's a very good reason for that. And they live underground. They like gnawing on coal. They'll eat anything organic,
Mm.
and they just have a very different way of looking at the world. And I think if humanity were to have to deal with another intelligent species, and not just go, we are the masters of creation. Well, we're us and the Shoggoths are kind of on an equal level here. Maybe we need to deal with that. I think it would be very good for us as a species.
Is
So
that
I
part
think
of the
ultimately,
fantasy of Tolkien of having different
yeah,
kinds of
exactly.
people to relate
Yeah,
to?
yeah. Yeah, Tolkien having the elves and the dwarves and all this kind of stuff. You see, my thing is I don't necessarily want them to be humanoid.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the glories of Lovecraft's imagination. Lovecraft is underestimated as a fantasist. The guy who could create a billion years of world history with less effort than it takes some people to imagine a country in.
Mm.
And he was very good at critters that aren't even remotely anthropomorphic.
Mm.
And that's the thing that I think we need. Critters that are just intelligent, thoughtful, interesting beings with a history, with with their own perspectives on the world, who are not like us at all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that answer.
Blobby masses of protoplasm that extrude pseudopods instead of creating tools, and with an indeterminate number of slightly glowing green eyes, who talk by whistling over a range of about 4 octaves.
I love it. I love it. I love that answer.
Yeah, exactly.
So we'll wrap it up here. Where can people find more of your work if they want to get to know you as well as I have over the years?
If they want to, my current blog is ecosophia.net, ecosophia.net. Mm-hmm. I have a Dreamwidth journal at ecosophia.dreamwidth.org. My books are available, as far as I know, from pretty much every online and offline retailer. If you have a full-service bookstore, please go in and ask them to order things for you, because when you do that, they'll order more than one copy and put something on the shelf. So that's a favor for all your favorite authors. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yeah, I highly recommend people to check out your work and catch up on what has been a remarkable body of work. And you're not done yet. Every time something interesting happens in the world, you've got a fresh perspective on it, and I just love it. And I'll put all the links in the show notes so people can find.
I think the word you want. I think the word you want is a weird perspective on it.
Well, I wanted to thank you personally, because I think what I am doing is a form of green wizardry, and just that phrase,
very much
hearing that at the right time in my life, and having a healthier perspective on the peak oil kind of drama in the early 2000s, it had subtle and pervasive effects on the direction that my life took. And here I am now. Here I am talking to you, and it has been an absolute delight.
Thank you. I've enjoyed our conversation also.
Recombination Nation explores how cultural and biological experimentation can lead us to a post-industrial future, one that is more interesting and plausible than either Star Trek or Mad Max. If you want to support my work, sign up to my Substack, where you can read free weekly updates from my experimental farm, book reviews, and deep dives. A paid subscription gives you access to the audiobook of Taming the Apocalypse, a bold survey of the hidden domestication potential across the entire tree of life, plus my archive of over 150 past posts.